Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Oregon Ducks commitment sweatshirt comes back on Monday morning. Four-star defensive lineman Viliami Moala committing to the Oregon Ducks in the 2026 class. And I think there are two things that really stand out. And we kind of talked about this yesterday as well when we were breaking down the commitment of Tom Tom. One, it's that win against Ohio State. Yeah, that was a massive win. And the landscape of 2024 kind of asserted Oregon as a legitimate national championship contender in 2024. But the impact it's having on this program over the next couple of years, the impact it had on the recruiting trail, that's also a massive storyline coming out of this football game. You look at a guy like Viliami Moala committed to USC for the last couple of months. He's on a visit to Oregon to watch that Ohio State game. Last night, decommits from USC. This morning, committing to Oregon. And we kind of said it yesterday. It's going to be a busy next couple of weeks and months for Oregon on the recruiting trail, really because of that win. Like that win, that environment that a lot of those recruits got to experience on Saturday night, that's something that means a lot to these kids on the high school recruiting trail. And I think, secondly, look at this Oregon class in 2026. 5 out of the 7 commitments they have are line of scrimmage players. Not only is it the number one class in the country right now in the 2026 cycle, but I think more importantly, Dan Lanning building this roster the right way. You want to get these line of scrimmage players out of the high school ranks. That's exactly what Dan Lanning's doing. I think Dan Lanning has a ton of firsthand experience in terms of how do we build a national championship caliber roster. I mean, he was a part of one of the better college football rosters we've ever seen in the last couple of decades with Georgia in 2021. He's just doing the same thing. He knows the blueprint and he's doing it in Eugene, Oregon. Really, really interesting commitment here. Viliami Moala, I'll just call him a bull. Like, this is one of those guys. You look at the mentality and the culture that Dan Lanning is trying to build specifically on the defensive line. Viliami, he's that kind of guy. You talk about a guy that you want on your team and not being playing against. This is one of those dudes, extremely physical, kind of similar build as Tom Tom, too, right? 6'3, 305, can eat up the double teams, but also be a difference maker in the pass rush. Going to get into a little bit of the film, take a look at where Oregon is going in the 2026 class. Now, before we get into it, as always, the Oregon Duck fans, y'all know it's been a blast for me to talk this program for the last 48 hours. The amount of support the Oregon fans have shown the boys, it's been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I got a feeling we're going to be doing a lot of commitment breakdowns over the next couple of weeks. Without further ado, let's get into Vili. I mean, I want to start with this kid's a two-way player in a legit two-way player at that. I think a lot of teams see him as a defensive lineman, kind of that nose technique type of guy. You dive into the film and say him as an interior offensive lineman, very, very impressive as well. Now, again, I think Dan Lanning wants him to play defense. I think that's kind of where he fits the best because of the not only how good he is at the point of attack, but the athleticism that he has as well. But man, you look at this kid and say he could definitely play either side of the football when he gets to Oregon. And with how many defensive line commitments Oregon already has, I would be interested to see if that conversation at some point comes up. Now you get into Viliami in terms of the film and say this kid's power in his hands. That's kind of what stands out the most. You dive into a little bit of the film. He really, really physical at the point of attack. But I think more importantly, kind of like we talked about with Tom Tom, this is a guy that he's also a very good athlete for the size. And you start firing up the film and you kind of see why. Kind of playing the three tech right here, really good athlete, versatile. I mean, he has that body type to play the nose, kind of like Jamari Caldwell or Derek Carmen can do at times. But you saw even against Ohio State, Jamari Caldwell playing the three tech, Derek Carmen playing the three tech. At some points, Derek Carmen was lining up as an edge rusher against Ohio State. Like Oregon wants to be really creative in terms of how they use the personnel up front. This is a guy that you can kind of move all along the defensive line. You look at not only the power, but a little bit of that athleticism, getting a little bendy around that guard. Again, one of those big bodies that can challenge interior offensive linemen, not only from a power standpoint, but from an athleticism standpoint as well. Kind of the same things we talked about Tom Tom yesterday. Again, nice little bend. You run this one back again. Decent get off the line of scrimmage. Bendy, challenging both the center and guard in terms of that outside shoulder. Getting to the quarterback. Now you see him playing a little interior offensive line. Again, this kid is super powerful. Like you talk about phone booth players when you want to lock this kid in the phone booth, that's where he excels. big time power in the hands, big time power in the lower body as well. Really thick lower half, and you see it when he's playing on the offensive line as well. Nasty, nasty dude. Continue to work through the film, work into the second level. Again, you talk about like getting the second level, which is something really important for interior offensive linemen to do. This kid can do it, and he's really, really good at holding his blocks. I was really impressed with what you saw on the offensive line film as well. So we'll see what he does at Oregon. But another one of those examples where you just want to get this kid onto your team and you can figure out the rest later. And I think the bigger storyline here is look at Oregon's class in 2026. We obviously see it's the number one class in the country, but what stands out to me right now is you start scrolling down and say, all right, Cody Green, top 30 national player, one of the best offensive tackles from modern day, committed to Oregon. Really good running back from Texas in Tre'Davious Ball. We talked about him over the summer. But then look at the rest of this class. I mean, it's all just blue chip, line of scrimmage players. Multiple guys on the defensive line that all have kind of different frames. You look at Tony Cumberland, 6'4.5", 285, not necessarily the fire hydrant build that Tom and Viliami have, but a guy that can be very disruptive as that three tech kind of guy. And you continue to scroll down, you obviously see Viliami Moala as well. Diverse bodies, but I think the most important conversation is we are filling it up on the defensive line. And that's exactly how Dan Lanning wants it to look. Not to compare Dan Lanning in this Oregon team to Georgia, but you look at what Georgia did and what made that defensive line so special in 2021 was not only the star talent, right? You had guys like Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt as your starting interior defensive linemen, two guys that went first round in the NFL draft. But more importantly, who was coming in when we were taking those guys to the side? Guys like Jalen Carter. And so you look at the recipe to build an elite defensive line. It's not only about who's playing the primary snaps, the starters, so to speak, but it's really important, especially on that defensive line, to have a very good rotation. You need depth to have a good rotation. That's exactly what Dan Lanning is doing with this Oregon program. We said it. We said it Saturday night when Oregon won. That game's going to mean something not only in 2024, but it's going to mean something on the recruiting trail. We're already starting to see that. Again, I think it's going to be a really fun next couple of weeks for this Oregon program. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.